Hello, everyone. As I was walking in, I noticed this piece of paper. It's speaker notes from another speaker, I guess. And so I was reading it, and I think I could probably do this talk. But it's an example of how these new large language model systems work. A generic intelligence can appear. It can look at a prompt, basically, and then basically make stuff up. There are things in here not in my background that I couldn't cover. So if I was forced to, I'd probably make more stuff up, right, the way that these algorithms do. But I've spoken more than a few times, so I could probably get through it. But some of you would shade me forever, knowing that it was all a lie. I think that's a kind of example of what I think AI is about today. It's a need to think critically about it. This is a collage I created of all the different ways that AI comes into different words. It's in the word aesthetics, not in the word ethics. It's in the word authentic. It's also in some kind of not great words, inadequate, or liar. But remember, it's in artificial, so that's kind of how it goes. And it can go imaginative, spin differently. So that's kind of how I feel about AI. It's a critical question today, but not just today. It's been around for quite a long time. So I want to go into that. I used to make these kinds of things out of computers. I then switched to making things out of iPods. When iPods came out, I began making sculptures out of iPods. I made a series of complex fishes. I also made iPod art based upon sort of human things, like this one. This is two iPods, where one iPod is like, nuzzled to next to each other. It's called marriage. Because it also has a part where these iPods, you had a hard disk in them. So there was a microsecond delay, or millisecond delay of some form, so that you played the video at the same video at the same time, and gradually they would come out of sync, just like, you know what I mean. So, and then I remember someone came to the gallery and said, well, what happens if one malfunctions and stops working? And I said, right? So anyways, my former boss, Nicholas Negroponte, I was influenced by his work because he was an architect who later went into computer science. This is in the 60s, actually. 70s, 80s. He's the person in the 70s who predicted that one day you will watch movies on the computer. Everyone laughed at him. But it turned out he was right. And Nicholas wrote this, and I refound it recently, and I want to read it with you. But it says, imagine a machine that can follow your design methodology and at the same time discern and assimilate your conversational idiosyncrasy. The same machine, after observing your behavior, could build a predictive model of your conversational performance. Such a machine could then reinforce the dialogue by using a predictive model to respond to you in a manner that is in rhythm with your personal behavior and conversational idiosyncrasies. Sounds like 95% correct, and that's from 1967.
Our world right now looks a lot like magic eye art. Chaos, disorder, a whole bunch of noise. And that's because the signals post-COVID have been mixing in a way that I just have never seen before. And these conditions can be destabilizing to countries, to companies, and to us as we are trying to think about what's next.
And when we think about the future, one of the big problems is we just don't know what to believe, because we're in the midst of what I always have called the modern believability crisis. And the modern believability crisis says we just don't know who's telling us the truth. Is Evian actually bottled in Switzerland, or is it just, water from somewhere else? And Evian is naive spelled backwards, and is that a conspiracy theory? We don't know, right? We can't tell. This is a trick. Which one of these faces is a real person? Actually, none of them are. They're all AI generated. But they all look like they could be a real person. And so we don't know. We're worried that we're being manipulated at all times. We also don't feel good. There's all these ads that come out. Hotness comes in all shapes and sizes, and then this ad shows you 4 women who are the same size. I am not the target audience for this ad, and I feel less hot looking at it. That's a problem. That's what we're surrounded by. Cocoa Krispies, all natural? How?
What happens to truth in an era where AI just makes fiction so believable?
Well, I have a slightly spicy take here, which is that I think technology has not been kind in a lot of ways to journalism, and I think that AI and this particular problem might actually be something that is quite kind and actually really reinforces the need for authoritative sources that can tell you this is real. Right? We actually went out, had humans investigate this, that we looked at all the different sides of this thing, and this is actually, these are authenticated, videos or whatever it is that can tell you like what happened and what the facts are. And so I think that where we're going to go is away from a world where, because certainly you saw some text somewhere that you can trust it's true, it's never really been the case. Humans have always been very good at writing fake text. Images, doctored images, those have existed since the invention of photography.
But this gives us the ability to do this at viral speed.
100%.
Right? All the bad things that happened over the last decade, if we're not careful,
Yes.
this will amplify.
Yes, and I think this to me, I agree with this, right? I think this is kind of the crux, is that the fact of being able to do these things at all, not new. The fact of being able to do it with a much lower barrier to entry, that's new, and that will, I think, spark the need for new solutions. We've never had real answers for sort of chain of custody of information online. We've never really had verified identities. All these things people talked about since the beginning of the internet, but I think there was never really a need for it. Yeah. And I think the need will come.
This fundamentally changes our relationship to information. So for example, think about search. If version 1 of search was blue hyperlinks, and version 2 was knowledge graphs showing you images and videos, then version 3 is going to wind up being something different. It's about continuous information transfer, something a little closer maybe to human conversation, or just the human transfer of information and knowledge sharing. And the more information that we move around, the more useful the system will become. Transformers are what underpin large language models, which everybody's talking a lot about lately, LLMs. Now these can recognize, summarize, translate, predict, generate text, but also other types of content, other types of knowledge that are gained from massive data sets. Basically, the model learns this huge library of text, which is called a corpus, and then it predicts what words or sequences might come next with probabilistic distributions. Transformer architecture is a lot like the neurons in our human brains, and LLMs have been conceived to work like we do, because the human brain is really just a pattern recognition machine. In fact, the T in ChatGPT stands for transformer. ChatGPT stands for Chat Generative Pre-trained Transformer.
Yeah, and let me give you a mental model for kind of how we build these systems. So there's the first step in the process of training what we call the base model. And the base model is just trained to predict the next word. You just give it a bunch of text, you give it all the good stuff and all the bad stuff. It sees true facts, it sees math problems with good answers and sort of incorrect answers that no one tells it's incorrect answers. It sees everything. And it learns to predict. It learns to just, given some document, it's supposed to predict what comes next. And it has to think through everything of like, okay, I see some math problem, but is this maybe written by a student who doesn't really know that much? Was this written by Terrence Tao? Like, it has to kind of infer all of these contextual things to figure out just what's the next word. So that model, it has every bias, it has every ideology, it has every idea that has been almost expressed in this system, kind of compressed and learned and in a real way. And then we do a second step of reinforcement learning from human preferences, of what we call post-training. And here you move from this like giant sort of sea of data of everything to really trying to hint to the model, okay, you kind of know all this stuff, but here's what you really should do.
Right.
And here I think there's something that's very important and very fraught, right? This question of, well, what should the AI do? Who should pick that?
We don't just want some random model hoovering up all of the available data out there and finding patterns in it without a human in the loop. But this technique is meant to fine-tune these models and align them with human values. But I gotta ask, which humans are doing this? Which humans are ranking the outputs? Do they represent a wide variety of diverse backgrounds and worldviews? How many of them are Brazilian, right?
But you put garbage in, you get garbage out. You know, if you start thinking about representation, if you start thinking about what actually goes into the data sets that you use to train and the learning data that you use for this, you know, you end up so often with all these shortcomings that are totally invisible until you see the actual output. But what goes in also comes out. Is that the innovation?
Yeah.
And that, I think, is also a whole different conversation and something that we're really trying to get some legitimacy around. But that second step is where these sort of behaviors come from. And I alluded to earlier that we found that the base model itself is actually very calibrated on its own certainty. You know, that if it spits out like, yeah, there's like a 10% chance this is right, 10% of the time, that thing will be right with quite good precision. But our current post-training process, this sort of next step that we do to really say, no, this is what you're supposed to do, we don't really include any of that calibration in there. You know, that the model really learns like, you know what, just go for it. And that, I think, is sort of a engineering challenge for us to address. And so you should expect that even with the current ChatGPT, we've released like 4 or 5 different versions since December, and they've gotten a lot better. Factuality improves, you know, that hallucinations are a problem people talk about, those have improved. A lot of the jailbreaks that used to work don't work anymore, and that is because of the post-training process. And so I would expect that we will have systems that are much more calibrated, that are able to sort of, you know, check their own work, that are able to be much more calibrated on when they should refuse, when they should help you, but also that are able to help you solve more ambitious tasks.
Like what?
Well, you know, I think that the kinds of things that I want as a programmer is that, you know, right now we started with a program called Copilot, which can do sort of, you know, just like autocomplete a line. And it was very useful if you don't really know the programming language that you're in, or you don't know specific library functions, that kind of stuff. So it's basically like, you know, being able to skip the dictionary lookup, and it just does it for you right there in your text editor. With ChatGPT, you can start being more ambitious. You can start asking to write whole functions for you, or like, oh, like you write the skeleton of writing a bot in this way. And I think that where we're going to go is towards systems that could help you be much more like a manager, right? Where you can really be like, okay, I want a software system that's architected in this way, and the system goes and it writes a lot of the pieces and it actually tests them and runs them. And I think this kind of like moving the, you know, giving everyone a promotion, right? Like making you into more of the, you know, bumping you up a couple pay grades. I think literally and figuratively. I think that's like the kind of thing that they will do to be the director. And I think that is going to be what writing will look like. I think that's what coding will look like. I think that's what sort of, you know, business communication will look like. But I also think that is what entertainment will look like. You think about today where everyone watches the same TV show, and, you know, maybe people are still upset about the last season of Game of Thrones. But imagine if you could ask your AI to make a new ending that goes a different way. And maybe even put yourself in there as a main character or something, having interactive experiences. And so I think it's just going to be every aspect of life is going to be sort of amplified by this technology. And I'm sure there are some aspects or people or companies that will say, I don't want that. And that's okay. Like, I think it's really going to be a tool, just like the cell phone in your pocket, that is going to be available when it makes sense. I kind of think it's a new frontier for most areas. You know, it may not be great yet at some domains, but I think that we are just going to see just like way more creative action happening. And to me, actually, the thing that's I think most sort of encouraging is I think it will be the barriers to entry decrease. And this is, by the way, how we thought about things at Stripe. Decrease the barrier to people making payments online, integrating them into their services. Way more activity happens, things you would never think of. And I think we'll see this in content. Like individuals who, you know, have a creative idea that they want to see realized, they now have a whole creative studio at their disposal. But also the pros, the people who really want to make something good, will make just something way better than any of the amateurs could. And we've seen this with DALL-E. Like, there's literally these 100-page books that people write on how to prompt DALL-E. And so I think that skill doesn't go away. I think it's this like multiplicative effect. But yeah, I think this suggests give you ideas. Really, in writing, it's like the blank page problem. But I think this, for me, is where generative AI can really shine. Right? Is really about sort of unblocking you, giving you ideas, and just giving you an assistant that is willing to do whatever you want 24/7. The way I think everyone used to think about this, certainly that I did, was it's very clear the AI is coming for the jobs, just a question of what order. And clearly the ones that don't, that are like menial or, just like, require physical work or something like that, the robots will come for that first. And in reality, it's been very different, right? That actually we've made great strides on cognitive labor, right? On, think about writing poems or anything like that. And we have not made very much progress on physical things. And I think that this amplification is kind of showing a very different character from what was expected. But it's also the case that we haven't really automated a whole job, right? That you think about, I think the lesson from that is that humans, I think, are much more capable than we give ourselves credit for, right? To actually, do your job, to do what you're doing right now. It's
well,
not
I
just,
asked ChatGPT, but these aren't the ChatGPT's questions. I had
There
to
you go.
follow up and say, can you be more hard-hitting?
There you go. Well, thank you.
Yeah. I'll
Are
ask
these
you.
the hard-hitting ones? Or
No, they're coming. Here we
Okay.
go.
Oh,
We're
great,
about to go
great,
into the
great.
future
Yeah.
of truth right after
There we go.
this. So,
Perfect.
yeah.
But ChatGPT, it's not up here on stage with me. There's the personal relationship aspect. There's this judgment aspect. There's so many details that are what you want from the person in charge. But the writing of the actual copy, I mean, who cares about the specific question?
So ChatGPT cannot replace me because it won't do the follow-up. Well, it probably will do the follow-up question. My follow-up question is, so give us a couple jobs most at risk.
Yeah. Well, I'll tell you the one that I think is actually content moderator.
Interesting.
So jobs, what I've really seen is jobs that you kind of didn't want human judgment there in the first place, right? You really just wanted a set of rules that could be followed, and you kind of wanted a computer to do it. But content moderation, I think, is just a difficult thing. I think we've all read about people having to read these pretty horrible posts and decide, is this thing sufficiently horrible or just slightly not sufficiently horrible to be disallowed? And that's something I already see this technology impacting.
If you go back to the 1980s, bank tellers were protesting in the streets with picket signs against a new technological innovation called the ATM. And they said, the ATM is going to take our jobs, right? And it didn't. You go to a bank today, they're still bank tellers. They just don't do the mundane task of counting out money. They service loans. They give you customer service. They help you get access back to your online banking account when you inevitably forget that password. So I think it will affect jobs, it will affect employment, but I don't think it will get rid of everything, and I think it will create new opportunities. If we look back historically on technological innovations, from the printing press, taking people that write stuff on stone tablets out of business, I mean, that worked out okay, right? To the bank teller example, into the future, right now, what is the big debate? Artists, musicians, artists, very worried about AI. You look at things like Midjourney and DALL-E, and you think, wow, that's insane. That is absolutely going to put me out of work. Or maybe it's going to allow you to prototype ideas at 1,000,000 times the speed you would have, and maybe your job it's not gone, it just changes slightly.
But I like the Marie Kondo style of thinking. Does it spark joy? So if you wake up in the morning and go to work and you're doing work and you're like, it doesn't spark joy. I'm sure some of you have that feeling. There's some stuff at work you're like, do I really have to do that? So that kind of stuff, in the does not spark joy column, I think leveraging these new AIs to do some of that wouldn't hurt. And then make sure you have the does spark joy column. This is very important. This is very positive to have, because what is it that, no, you're not going to take this away from me at all, Terminator. I'm going to keep doing this, right? So what sparks joy? Got to hold on to that. So, and if you think carefully about how to do this, you can remove the does not spark joy stuff to create more time for the spark joy stuff. And it comes full circle to the laws of simplicity a book I wrote in 2005 that after I wrote it, I realized what I was supposed to put in the book, and it was too late. And I was like, so I've always kept it around. It's called the cookie and laundry principle. So it goes like this. Those of you who have children, if you give a child the option, big cookie or little cookie, assuming gluten-free, nut, all that stuff. Okay, you know, goat cheese, everything, okay? Which one are they going to choose? They're going to want the big one. It's like, oh, you want the small one? It's got like Godiva chocolate bits in it. No, I want the big one. However, if you present them with laundry, you got a big pile of laundry to do, or a little pile of laundry to do. Like, which one are you going to do? It's like, I think I want the little one. You know? So, like years later, I realized that this is how to approach AI as well. So we have to know what we want to do more of versus what we want to do less of. And if we can divide these two together separately, we can live life with more enjoyment and less pain, and AI can possibly help us do that. So thinking this way, what does not spark joy, what does spark joy, I think that you can have a more of a player mentality as these things unfold this year.
There's 3 types of artificial intelligence I'm personally looking at. There's AI, what we have today. That would be Typeface AI, ChatGPT, Script, all of these different programs. And then there's going to be the future. And the future is things, what they call a AGI, an artificial general intelligence. And that's exciting. It would be able to effectively replicate you or I. But beyond that is a superintelligence. And the thing that I'm looking forward to in the future is a quantum superintelligence. And if we are lucky enough to get to that point and create a quantum superintelligence, that would in theory be the last thing we ever invented as a species. Because after that, it would invent everything.
On the horizontal axis is time, and on the vertical axis is the power of computation. So on the left-hand side, you have computers as not powerful at all, and getting more powerful because of the Moore's law impact. And in 2000, people believed that computers became smarter than at least an insect. And in 2010 is when this chart came out, 2011, the Time article. And he predicted that in 2015, the computer would be relatively equivalent to a rodent. And sure enough, in 2015, that actually happened, or there was a scientific paper on it. That was kind of interesting. He also said in 2023, it would approach the intelligence of a person. So now people are kind of like wondering, like, whoa, what's happening? And then he predicted in 2045, the computer would be smarter than every human being on the planet. And we're like, whoa, right? So this ChatGPT thing came out of nowhere. Where'd it come from? I describe it like the, you know the ketchup bottle made out of glass? Those of you who remember before this advanced technology for squeezing ketchup came along? Do you remember? It's glass ketchup bottle. See some nodding? Some of you younger people may have no idea what I'm talking about. But it used to be you had this glass ketchup bottle, and it was really hard to get the ketchup out of the bottle. You'd like, you know, knife, come on, you know, and then you're like, French fries, gotta eat them. No ketchup? Maybe, no, need ketchup. And so you'd ultimately like go too far, and the ketchup would come all out, and like, oh no, all that ketchup. That's kind of the moment we're feeling right now. And like, oh my gosh, all that GPT came out just now. Because it's a Moore's law quality, the doubling of things. And so my favorite example is this example from an old British riddle. It goes like this. There's a pond, and the pond has lily pads on it. There's a biologist who lives next to the pond, and she wants to run an experiment. So she clears the pond of lily pads, and she plants a certain kind of lily pad that doubles overnight. So she plants 1 lily pad, and it becomes 2 the next night. It becomes 4 the next night. It becomes 8 the next night. And so the riddle goes, in 30 days, the pond is completely filled with lily pads. So on what day was it half full of lily pads? And so if you use linear thinking for this question, the answer is obvious. It's like half of 30. It's day 15 and when it was half full. But if you use exponential thinking, it was actually on the 29th. So that's kind of like the ketchup coming out of the bottle. It's like it's already been kind of about to come out, and it was doubling. It just doubled a lot. So what I've gathered is recent things that I've been thinking about in the large language model AI space, built on basically the past few decades kind of scratching my head about this. So that's where we're going to go. OK, so like, so you see here all the pink. That's the large language models that have been like, think of the pond, lily pads, and the plop, 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 the bigger plops, right? And then there's all these other models that are happening. They are vision models, image processing models, graph models. And the orange one is interesting. The orange one is called unified models, so-called multimodal models that can cross language and images and other domains.
Fast forward to now, 2023. This is one of many pages out of our AI section of the trend report, and all it is models, okay? You can see that we've reached a tipping point here. We are living through the radical transformation of information gathering and sharing. There are a ton of models. Text generators, that's GPT. Text-to-image generators, text-to-video generators. There's a generative AI that predicts the structure of every protein. There's a generative AI just built for climate science. There's one in particular that I want to highlight from DeepMind, which is part of Google. And this is what's known as a generalist AI. This thing can do many things on its own. It can play Atari, caption images, chat with humans. It can also stack blocks, operating robot arms. This is a robot. And much more. Generalist AIs are a very important step in achieving artificial general intelligence. And I have news for you. We are now on that path. It's going to be possible to train even larger models, 5 times the size of Wikipedia, for less money. With accelerators and chips and all these new types of computing systems that are being built, there will be a compounding effect. By 2030, we could have AI systems that are 1,000 times more powerful than they are today. It's not an exaggeration. This evolution is invisible to us. We are currently in a text-to-everything moment, but this is just the beginning. We are in a transition that I think is going to last somewhere between 2 and 3 years. And in the process, on the other side of that, these multimodal generalist AIs, they're going to be the new norm. This is going to happen really fast, and we are not prepared. Multimodal models are going to get woven into all of your digital experiences via an API. Here's your key insight. We've entered the assistive computing era. And the implication is you will never think on your own again. Modern life is full of invisible tools that have become ubiquitous and indispensable that at this point we can't live without them. We don't even think about them as tools anymore. So that piece of paper that you have, that's a tool that got invented 2,000 years ago in China. Before paper, it was very hard to record information. So think of the value that paper created. It allowed ideas to spread. It allowed government to happen. It allowed business. It democratized education. You know, what about the calculator? Here's another example. When was the last time that you did long division in your head? We don't bother anymore because we have an assistive tool literally on us at all times, inside of our phone, that can save us from having to do that work. So again, if we look at the convergences between trends, we can start to see that soon humanity is going to have many different tools in the forms of generative AI and the industrial metaverse, which, just like the calculator and paper that came before, will be ubiquitous, invisible, and will transform society.
We are doing for knowledge work what the Industrial Revolution did for physical work. What we did in the Industrial Revolution is we took skills of human labor and we gave them an amplification. And now we're doing the same thing with knowledge work. We're able to take that knowledge work and do so much more and put so much more power behind it. We can take it and say, now we can, like in the Industrial Revolution, we could take power and turn that into much, much more than the human body was capable of. Now we're doing the same thing with the mind. And when you do that, when you extract the need for labor to be present for something, now you free it to do other things like manage process, enhance the product, or even think of other ideas. If you take a look at something like ChatGPT or even Midjourney, let's say I want to write a novel in the style of David Sedaris. I am able to take that skill and program it in a way where it's abstracting the years of knowledge and discipline that I have to put into in order to do it in that way. So I can take a skill and I need to know how to do it, but I'm able to flex that skill in 1,000 different ways. I can program it to take that work off of my shoulders. Composable means that I can stack skills on top of each other. The crypto crowd loved composability because they call it money Legos. You can stack these different parts of the ecosystem on top of each other, and they're interoperable, meaning software development is super fast and efficient and flexible and able to build in all these different permutations. The same thing with these skill sets. And finally, upgradable. I talked about any part in that assembly line gets enhanced, the whole product improves. Now, anytime ChatGPT gets an upgrade, so do you. You didn't have to go back to school for it. You didn't have to spend more time learning how to write, but all of a sudden, you have 5,000 new skills that came from the recent upgrade.
Assistive computing increases productivity. It's tremendous. So look at programmers for a moment. On average, programmers see a 55% reduction in the amount of time that it takes them to complete a task when they're working with assistive AI. Awesome, right? How many of you are graphic designers? So it might take you roughly 300 minutes or so to create a new design. For an AI assistant, it takes on average, now you're gonna have to squint because it's actually there. So if you look and see where, I'm just gonna go over here. You see where it says AI? Squint really tight. There it is. There it is. Less than 1 minute to create a design. Tools require knowledge and understanding to achieve results. So paper is only useful to you if you're literate. A calculator is only useful to you if you know math. If you don't have foundational knowledge to use either of these tools, they're not going to create value for you, right? The problem is, now good prompts are hard to write, and you can instruct assistive computing tools to do really interesting things, but you have to have that foundational knowledge, just like you would need to operate a calculator or use a piece of paper.
What this is going to do is make us all generalists. And this is the era of the creative generalist. We come from a space where we are all told to specialize. From school, from early age, when you're young, specialize. Find a place to really lean into, build your expertise, become an expert, and become indispensable in that space. Well, now we're in an era where AI can outpace any one individual very quickly in a specific domain. So the idea of specializing early can actually be a detriment. And to those who have expertise and depth in several domains and interests and passionate curiosity across a broad swath, those are the people who are going to dominate the next era. The reason for that is when you have an understanding of how something works, you can now produce for it. And when you produce for these things, you don't have to have expertise in all the different layers to make that happen. You can know how the general territory or field operates and then have the machines abstract the rest of the skills. This is Sam. He's actually one of our artists. He really knows graphic design. He knows illustration. He knows lettering. Every single piece of the comic book process he knows to a T. But with design tools powered by AI, over the last 6 months, as a one-man shop, he's been able to take that comic book and turn it into an actual three-dimensional production. 3D modeling, camera movement, sculpting, blending, character design, motion capture, all of the virtual production elements, one person. Now, these are skills that require some expertise and diving deep in to understand them, but there's no way this would have been possible a couple of years ago. And now, with some effort, it is. So by having an understanding of different spaces, regardless whether you have expertise in them, you can start to dabble in them with the AI being able to take care of the rest of the last mile. A lot of people are really afraid that we're going to lose our jobs. We will not lose our jobs. We will lose our job descriptions. I just said a moment ago that I can hop into any role I want to at any time I need to. That might instill some fear that a specific role is no longer necessary. But if you think through the math, that's true of everyone. Every one of you here now has that capability. Your colleagues do too. If you're out, they can pop in for you. If they're out, you can pop in for them. It's not that AI takes away a job. A person using AI will take away a job. And eventually, we will see some drop-off in specific roles, but this is going to be the big change in our organization. When your organization no longer expects incremental growth in a specific role, but you have teams of people working horizontally with a strong depth of expertise in a particular area, all of that new capability is net new, not incremental. All of a sudden, you have exponential growth. What we find when we implement automation and we use AI to assist us, stuff happens. And with the scientists that did this study, they used AI to help them do more experiments and run the experiments more efficiently. It succeeded so well at doing that, brilliantly. So much so that they were able to exponentially increase the number of experiments they were able to perform. That's fantastic. That's the result you want.
There's a team of Japanese researchers who connected brain scans to generative AI. They figured out how to use a functional MRI, fMRI, while a person is awake, along with stable diffusion, to reconstruct visual images from human brain activity, which is a fancy way of saying assistive computing allowed researchers to read people's minds. There's this company called Absci. They're a startup, and they figured out how to apply generative AI to biology. So they generated an antibody designed from scratch. Antibodies, all you need to know is they're part of our immune system, and they can be biologically programmed to bind to specific tissues to do things like fight cancer. They are testing roughly 3 million unique AI-generated designs every week. There's just no way that a team of humans could do that on their own. So what does that mean? Today, a programmer who is writing code could maybe in 1 to 2 years be the person that saves somebody's life. It's totally possible that programmers may be part of first responders teams in the future. Surgeons do use some assistive tools in the operating suite, like machines to monitor oxygen and things like that. But this is still largely analog. I mean, it's still to some degree guesswork. Pretty soon, assistive tools, digital twins, extended reality, they're going to be used in the operating room during surgery. These tools will make up the medical metaverse, which will lead to fewer errors and better patient outcomes. And this is not some pipe dream. This is Magic Leap, which some of you probably recognize, and FDA approvals are already in the process. I think we're going to look back at the year 2023 and shake our heads in disbelief. Surgeons used to slice into us without assistive computing tools of the medical metaverse like barbarians. How did we survive? In 2038, healing is personal. The industrial metaverse, doctors are performing surgery that's hyper-personalized for the patient's specific biology. The guesswork is now gone. Brick and mortar hospitals have been replaced by local surgical hubs, which means that people in remote areas still have access to very high quality care. Doctors are using the tools of the industrial metaverse, the medical metaverse, combination of extended reality, digital twins, robotics, as well as generative AI tools to ensure the best possible patient outcomes. Because assistive tools are now evenly distributed, this isn't fancy healthcare for wealthy people, it's just healthcare.
The idea of the metaverse is about what you project into the world and what you take into a virtual environment, but also doesn't have to be 3D. And
okay,
we can get an
computer,
example.
I'd like a corn-themed wallpaper. No. Corn on the cob in a tiling pattern. Yeah, okay. Need something else to make it interesting. Let's stylize it and add some pink flowers. Yeah, perfect. Can we make it bigger? Yeah, great. Cool, let's buy it.
So this example is from Meta. The person here is actually learning how to drum and is using live feedback to help them with technique and timing and where to place their sticks. And these types of things are available for all sorts of skill sets. It's not just learning music, but you could even do this with learning a martial art. And the idea of the metaverse, I think, will be more about communal and external experience first, before it's about headsets. Think about the logistics of people owning enough headsets for us all to get into a VR experience that is global scale. Well, there are already technologies that exist that we have been using for a long, long time that get us to ways where we can manipulate the world around us with generative AI, with projection and light being the key thing. This is what we will see far, far, far sooner than smart glasses that are as small as this and as powerful as you need to have a compelling experience.
I am the only human on this set. They are not real. They are computationally generated in real time.
These are neons. They were announced several years ago. At the time, they took really expensive computers to run. Now you could probably do it with a 4090 pretty easily, and they look incredibly lifelike. Now, the tech is there. The ability to have a conversation with an avatar, maybe customer service or some other role that looks and has realistic expressions is almost not even a thing. But this is going to be creating interactions where we can't really perceive the difference between a human and an AI. And while so many of us would like to say, I can't be tricked in having feelings for an AI, there are people who would be begged to differ. And it's not just about the feelings you'll have for an AI, but how are you going to be represented potentially as an AI? And I wanted to find this out, actually. So I worked with a company called Hour One to have myself digitally remade as an avatar and to see what that could do for me. What could I gain from having my own avatar? And this is what that looks like.
Thanks, Roxy. The digital fashion world made a lot of noise with several important stories this week. Artifact, one
Ian,
of the most
speak Portuguese?
prominent Web3 studios, is launching
uma nova linha de acessórios no seu último bootejamento. O artefacto é a força motriz por detrás do domínio da Nike NFT.
So all of a sudden, when I want to produce content, I don't have to go to my studio, set up my lights and my camera, and spend 20 minutes getting into my setup to produce content and then edit. I can write the script, pull the content together, the B-roll, set it up to Hour One, and hit render. And all of a sudden, I have a distribution and an ability to relate to a culture that I would have no access to otherwise. I am now multiple. This is using Gen 1 from Runway. And as you can see, he's got this great setup in his room where he's got a whole bunch of stuff placed right in the right direction that's structurally similar to what he wants to create. And then he uses a prompt to overlay the style on that. And what's beautiful about this is that it doesn't require crazy technical ability to do this. Both the camera and the world around him are the canvas for this activity. So having some ability to understand what's the world I want to create, how do I just move a bunch of things around in my house, and then what's the style I want to put over it, is the start of something like this. What you're about to see would normally take an entire team of visual effects artists hours, if not days, to produce.
Welcome to Wonder Studio, where making movies with CGI is as simple as selecting your actor and assigning a character. The system uses AI to track the actor's performance across cuts and automatically animates, lights, and composes the CG character directly into the scene. Whether it's one shot or a full sequence, Wonder Studio analyzes and captures everything from body motion, lighting, compositing, camera motion, and it even tracks the actor's facial performance. All the artist needs is a camera.
There's been really a lot of new updates. Now we can identify people through a video for a very long time. Like if you want to analyze or replace people in videos or understand what they're doing, it's very important to first understand like which person, is that the same person across the entire time? And then in normal videos that people consume, people are always occluded by other people. And this is a very challenging problem of tracking. And it's been long studied in computer vision. And we made a really big progress because now we can actually track people much better in 3D. Because in 2D, people overlap. It's very difficult to identify who is who. But in 3D, you know that they're different places.
Right.
And so you can actually distinguish them really well. And so tracking is really good. And we recently released this tool that builds on this that can actually reconstruct people in 3D and actually capture their spatial relationships. And this is actually really important in understanding, how people interact with each other, because clearly we're like sitting nearby each other, facing each other, and capturing that kind of subtle spatial motion is something you think is obvious, but it's really hard.
So you can upload your entire sequence and mark your actor, and it will look for that actor throughout the cuts. So it can really save you so much time. Still up to an artist, cinematographer, to shoot. There's still movie magic behind it, which is extremely important for us. You need to know how to shoot it. If you shoot it with an iPhone in a poorly lit room, it will pick up that information, and your result will look bad. So if your CG character, which is still created by an artist, 3D artist, needs to look good, and it's going to render better if you shoot it better.
So why is this not far-fetched? Well, we develop bonds with other species. Dogs, horses, cats, our pets, fictional characters. Have you ever cried or yelled at a movie? Or a book? And even stuffed animals as a kid. So why not AI? Why is that so hard to believe?
So I start to say, well, there's this guy who's in a kind of virtual world, and he finds out that there's a real world, and he's really questioning what's real and not real, and he really wants to know what's real. And the young girl was like, why? And I was like, what do you mean? She was like, who cares if it's real? And I was like, what, you don't care if it's real? And she was like, no.
They say progress happens one funeral at a time. And really that just means pushing us up and out and them in. But that is the way of the next generation. Why? Why does it matter? When they grow up interacting with augmented reality filters as a daily habit, when their own version of reality is influencers, which is no connection to reality at all, when half of the content they listen to has a synthetic voiceover, and they're already familiar with avatars, they grew up with these characters. They're already a part of their social circle. We're at a point where we have to understand how many of their friends are real and how many of their friends are synthetic.
I've been thinking a lot about modern loneliness, which masks itself as hyperconnectivity. How can we have 1,000 virtual friends and then no one to ask to feed our cat? How can we develop deep bonds with our coworkers on Slack or see them in their homes on Zoom without ever meeting them in real life? And how we think that we know the lives of others because of what they post, but how we truly have no idea. We live in a world of curated, filtered imagery that puts us in a constant state of social comparison. And self-esteem has become contingent on performance that is measured by engagement metrics. Did I get enough likes? Artificial intimacy with a bot is not actually what concerns me. What concerns me is how digitally facilitated connections are now lowering our expectations of intimacy between humans. How common has it become that we talk to somebody about something that's important, personal, vulnerable, and then as we talk to them, we hear, We have come to accept distracted attention as enough, and it's not. Over the last decades or so, these situations in which people are supposedly with each other but not present, this is artificial intimacy. And artificial intimacy is full of disrupted connections that have become normalized and socially acceptable. They are associated with a particular feeling that is called ambiguous loss. When you are with someone who is still physically present, but they are emotionally or psychologically gone, like dementia. Or when you are in a situation with someone who is very much physically and emotionally present, but they are physically absent, like deployment or disappearance. Dating apps that give us a hedonic treadmill of options. Every time we get a match, we flood with dopamine and adrenaline. We reach out, maybe they respond. We go back and forth, flirting, like the mother and the baby, playing, planning to meet up. It's the goo-goo gaga phase. And then, suddenly, they're gone. Ghosting. Maybe they leave us with a few breadcrumbs of hope. Maybe they literally ghost us altogether. Intimacy avoidance is a direct result of the rise of artificial intimacy. And so we start to collapse just like the baby. We try to self-soothe. We're angry, upset, rejected, confused, desperate. And we may go through this sometimes, this very same cycle, with 20 different people before we get to the actual first date with someone. So, if we get to the first date, it seems that we've become quite incapable of tolerating any uncertainties, and we're looking for perfection. Any imperfections that may show up that don't match our checklist. The checklist. How many of you have gone on a date with the checklist? Looks like a job interview. You know, they must be taller than me, with a great job, a full hairline if you're a guy, a perfect hourglass if you're a woman, a face like a beauty filter. Their political opinions must align with ours, or else they're an idiot. They must be well-read. And God forbid they commit a faux pas, because we immediately get that ick factor that shuts the whole thing down, probably without ever telling them the real reason why. And then we get back on the hedonic treadmill of modern dating, to the point where one guy told me recently, a young man tells me, that he spends more time trying to figure out how to crack the algorithm of his dating apps so that he gets better options than he does actually dating people. In reality, he's not trying to get better options. He's trying to understand why the algorithm thinks that he's not good enough. A unique part of intimacy is that when we allow ourselves to truly meet another, we also meet new parts of who we are. True intimacy, as I see it, is a maelstrom of contradictory emotions. It's love and hate, attraction and repulsion, excitement and boredom. It's often called relational ambivalence. It's all of you who said earlier that on occasion you would like to be out of the relationship that you are in. And the next day are so grateful to be there. Relational ambivalence is what we experience when we are locked in a situation with no easy answers and need to hold both parts of a dilemma. Genuine intimacy lives side by side with closeness and distance, care and aggression, unmet needs and unconscious longings, trust and betrayal, ruptures and repair, transgressions, intergenerational trauma and loss, love and the fears that we bring to love. None of the relationship dilemmas that you heard have easy or discrete binary answers. In fact, much of life's challenges are not problems we solve. They are paradoxes that we manage. In the real world, People are not always instantly available, on demand to soothe you, pure and without their own histories, nor are relationships ever a one-way street. We did this before with junk food, by the way. The promise of repeatable, always available, shelf-stable food was irresistible, and only now are we coming to terms with the nutrition that we traded away and the consequences for our physical health. Why should mental health and relational health be any different? Our increasingly predictive technologies, while they have solved many of life's biggest inconveniences, are also making us unprepared and unable to tolerate the inevitable unpredictabilities of human nature, love, and life. They promise to eliminate friction, to smooth the rough edges. We've all been stroking these phones. We know what I'm talking about. But I do fear that we may be smoothing life's rough edges to the point of flatness. Trust me, I'm a sex and relationship therapist. Friction is a potent ingredient of eroticism. It's like I have entered a form of assisted living. My calendar pings me with my next meeting. Waze tells me which road to take. Spotify tells me what to listen to next. Netflix tells me what to watch. If I was single, I'd probably be on a dating app. But let's be honest, I'm still late. I always get massively lost. My husband and I now talk the entire evening about which movie to watch, but we end up watching none, because there's too much choice. And the dating apps, even 65% of relationships, now start online, but it's also the #1 thing that people complain to me about. Don't get me wrong. I enjoy my inconveniences being removed, but at the same time, being uncomfortable, doing things that you end up not enjoying, being afraid, and taking risks are some of the ways that we learn who we are and who we are not. The experimentations and the failures are essential to the development of our identity. And you would think that having all these recommendations in the palm of our hand would make us more confident, less anxious, more prepared for what we call in French l'inconnu, the unknowable. But what if they are eroding us? When we take the risks away, we take away the learning opportunities. We create rigidity in a world that demands flexibility. We develop a constant need for certainty when facing uncertainty has always been a fact of life, something that many of you in this room know very well. And as my colleague Theodora Pavkovic explains, it's our ability to act freely upon the uncertainty and then see the ripples of our own actions that lets us know that we are alive. AI Esther can give analysis on what it's trained for, but it doesn't have personal beliefs, and I do. In trying to reduce complex issues to zeros and ones, we've become more black and white in our thinking, and especially in the way that we are approaching relationships. But the issues that you would be coming to me with, many of them, would require technicolor strategies. Should we stop sleeping with other people? Should we start sleeping with other people? Together or apart? When should we have another child? Should I freeze my eggs? Should we unplug grandma? Should we live closer to our family or set out on our own? When the relationship is too good to leave and too bad to stay, shall I stay or shall I go? I suggest that we stop treating these dilemmas like technical problems that have clear-cut solutions. Ron Heifetz calls them adaptive challenges. They require changes in values and in perspective. And most importantly, it's the ability to hold both. It's not we should save ourselves, we should save our nation, as if they are two incompatible things, and as if he doesn't care about the self and she doesn't care about the nation. That's called polarizing. Many of us are currently living with heavy questions that don't have right and wrong answers. Whatever decision you make will come with consequences that you must carry. Every choice carries grief for the option that we didn't choose. And the siren song of our screens is the false promise that we can make choices without experiencing this grief. Our current focus on smooth and polished, free of large obstacles and minor discomforts is making many of our lives easier, no doubt. But these attempts to remove pain, inconvenience, and discomfort are leaving us ill-prepared for the messiness, the bumps, the smells, the decays, the everyday inconveniences, the SVP of living in close proximity with another human. Basically, the less shiny aspects, dare I say. So, I want to focus on the shinier side for a moment. Intimacy is embodied. AI Esther is not, but I am, and you are. You have known intimacy since you were in the womb. For a year and a half when you were little, before you uttered your first word, you mastered the language of the body. You knew the language of intimacy: touch, smell, which is our memory, sight, eye contact, taste, sound. Do not forget, you are alive.
And realizing that we all have a talent that goes beyond what we believe, and that we all need to believe more in ourselves, because we are all more powerful than what we even realize. I'm a cook, and you could argue, even if, my friends and family complain all the time about my cooking.
Who complains about
too much
your
salt,
cooking?
too little this, too small, too smoky. Oh my God, people are so opinionated. But going to this Central Kitchen and meeting the founder, Robert Egger. Robert Egger is a fascinating human because he was a bartender and saw waste happening in the restaurants. And he thought, we need to make sure that we have no more waste. But he was the brilliant guy that said, but the conversation is the wrong one. Everybody's talking about food waste. Wrong. Forget food waste. What we are doing by wasting food is that actually we are wasting people. We are wasting the lives of people. So he began bringing that food, waste food, unused food, and began bringing the most important part, the people, ex-convicts, ex-homeless, training them to be cooks. In the process, making meals to feed the homeless population of Washington, D.C. Those are the people that need to be seen. Do you know how many times we have a hunger conference and everybody talking in the hunger conference has never been hungry? How are we going to be finding solutions to the problem if we don't listen to the stories of the people that are facing those problems? By me bringing you to the kitchen was a way to give voice to those people.
It's important to tell stories because you don't know who needs to hear it.
My mom will be a magician because when the fridge looks like a Best Buy commercial, that the fridge is always empty, which I don't understand. If I was a salesman, I would fill up the fridge. But anyway, the fridges are always empty for some reason, clean. Okay, the fridge in my house will be empty like a Best Buy commercial. But my mom will always find something. The piece of ham dry, like you could stand up on its own, The egg that was so hard, already with creatures growing in the surface. No, but hey, hello, it's Roquefort, it's blue cheese, it's that. My mom will get that, will chop it, and she will make the bechamel with flour, and she will make the croquetas. Everything was left over because maybe there was no more money home until the next paycheck. She will carry with that non-stop. That story is one that is still in my brain. And that my mom will make with the old bread, the bread crumbs, using the coffee grinder. That's why the coffee in my house was always so thick, because they and she'll roll the bechamel in the bread. That's a story I love to tell, because I'm not telling the story. My mom was not telling me the story. The sequence of events, I was part of the story. I was part of the story of love, because my mom cooking for us was love. Responsibility, probably, even if she didn't love us, she had the responsibility to, I have to feed those bastards, little creatures. Was an understanding of doing whatever she could with the resources she had. That's why this story, I love to tell the story, but in a way my mom told me this story without words, just with actions. Those are Trojan horses. They're Trojan horses that make you understand exactly what's happening. And me, I love to see now these stories, like if I travel back 40 years in time, and I could be there just as a spectator and see the entire sequence of events, and everything was happening there that was far away more than just my mom cooking and feeding my brothers and I. It was many stories all happening at once. That's why for me, my restaurants, when I have these croquetas, it's just no croquetas that, by the way, I cannot believe I'm charging $10 for 5 croquetas and you are all buying them. Because my mom will make that with sense. But in the process, those croquetas that you are ordering in my restaurant, you may know or you may not know, but I guarantee you every time you bring one of those croquetas to your mouth, even if you are unaware, that story is becoming part of who you are. That croqueta is becoming a Trojan horse of you understanding a little bit more, maybe about me, maybe about the Spanish cooking, or maybe about those mothers and grandmothers trying to feed a family almost without nothing. It's a fascinating way how those stories become part of you, even if you are not even looking at the story or at the storytelling itself. Let's remember who feeds America and who feeds the world. It's not boys like me. The 7 plus, almost 8 billion people on planet Earth, they're all being fed by women. Women are at the heart of feeding the world. And that's something we need just to recognize and start giving tools. Actually, I just came back from Turkey, and was something very important that happened there. The Ukrainian government is very thankful of the help Turkey has been providing to Ukraine. So they send 80 firefighters, search and rescue team members, even when their country is under missile
Which
attacks.
is incredible. Like,
And they send 90 firefighters to help and rescue people in Turkey. But also, members of World Central Kitchen from Ukraine, they requested and they drove for thousands of miles. They drove all the way to Turkey to join also the feeding operations. So in a way, these are the stories that keep repeating themselves, the stories that feed themselves. And it's very beautiful to see through people, through food. This is a story that forever keeps building, creating this amazing, uniqueness kind of universe of people that in more ways than one keep sharing and are part of the same story. But what we need all to remember, that we all need to have a very big belief in ourselves. All of you have talents that you didn't reach to its limits. All here, all of us at South by Southwest, that we keep coming back every year. This is a very important, beautiful, powerful community. I know if something happens, the community of South by Southwest will always be next to us. And that belief that we are as good as the people we have around us, and really believe it. And knowing that you will be there for me as one day I will be there for you. And people that you don't know right now that you're sitting next to it, they can be the person that help you tomorrow. We all need to have bigger faith in humanity. We all need to take more risk. We all need to believe in each other. And just to end, let's stop throwing money at the problem. Let's stop just helping any organization out there because it seems it's the right thing to do. Remember what I told you. Philanthropy must stop being about the redemption of the giver. Philanthropy must be about the liberation of the receiver. When we help with time, with money, with know-how, we need to make sure that we push those organizations, especially the biggest ones, of are you delivering on your promise? If you're not, move aside and let the new organizations move in.
Jose, Andreas, thank you so much for what you do.
Thank you.
My friend.
Thank you, Michelle. Thank you, guys. We love you. World Central Kitchen.